Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in our Value Up webinar series. I am Waleed Mazen, your host for today's webinar, founder and managing director of Vivere. We are very excited to have you here today with us to listen to Craig Stevens talk about the secondary drivers of change, understanding the ripple effect on our organizations and what is happening today. A brief introduction to our speaker today, Craig Stevens. Craig is known as the change mentor because of his passion for helping others master all things change and the Flags of America artist for his art that lifts up heroes who gave their lives protecting others. He has written many papers and several books on excellent change management. As an educator, he teaches graduate level classes in project management and optimization for CASRE, ISE, UTK. Over the years, he has taught for the American Management Association International, NASA, Padlet, Thompson, and graduate and undergraduate classes and workshops for Vanderbilt, Belmont University, Trevecca, and others. Craig has been a consultant for over 100 different organizations such as SAIC, NASA, Lockheed Martin, Westinghouse, DuPont, and others. Craig has worked in every layer of an organization and is several industries such as healthcare, agriculture, government, manufacturing, hospitality, real estate, investing, and construction, and waste management. With this, if you have any questions, please place your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we will have questions towards the end. With this, I'd like to hand over to you, Craig. All yours.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. This is a great honor to me just to be here with you. And Wahid, if you see anything that as we're going through this, if you see any questions that you would like to bring to my attention, please don't hesitate, but stop me, because this is very informal. My whole purpose in life is to help you guys. And so if I can help you in any way, just let me know, and I will answer questions as we go, if they come up. And we can also do that at the end. But the secondary drivers of change, this is a model, a large part of a much larger model. But anytime that you implement a change within your organization, or anytime that a change outside your organization comes into where you have to react to it, what happens is this kind of ripple effect. And the ripple effect, I like this picture, because where you start the change, you'll get the most impact, but it may ripple around the whole organization, and it may do that for years. And so I created this whole systematic and repeatable approach to change management that we talked about last time we were together. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just kind of give you an overview. So change happens in your organization like this. You make some change, you manage it with a project, but there's also a people part. But every time you make that change, a secondary change happens, which drives other changes throughout the organization. It may systems thinking is a part of that, continuous improvement is a part of that, strategies a part of that, design thinking is a part of that. And then there's all kinds of other projects that may be thrown into your portfolio and configuration management, and it starts the process over, and it goes like this forever. So what we're going to do, and then the engine of change are the 7 attributes that are important to all of that. And we'll talk more about some of these. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus mainly on this part. But we can't even focus on that without talking a little bit about change. And this whole engine of change is very important, because we'll see how that fits into it. But we're going to focus on this model 9. These are all, we're in the process of writing books about all of this stuff. And so you can, if you're interested, we'll make sure you're on that list to receive some of these if you want. So let's pretend like we're going to start a company together, and there's me and you and a couple other people that are coming together and are going to start this company. Well, before we ever start, there's an external environment. Something exists before we ever came together, and it may be international or it may be more local. And so that's what's happened before we even get together. But the moment we get together, we just added people, right? So the second element in these drivers of change is the people side. Once we organize, you're the president, I'm the vice president, or the chief bottle washer, or whatever our titles are. The moment we do that, then we create this organizational structure. And the moment we create an organizational structure, we have you, the president, we have me, the chief bottle washer, and we have a couple of VPs, you know, whatever we call ourselves. And so that becomes the organizational structure. Now, everybody within our organization is in this internal environment, and everybody outside our company is in this external environment. And then now we're going to start adding systems. We're going to have accounting systems. We're going to have a fleet of cars. Maybe we're going to have buildings. We're going to have other things. Everything else is just a system. So if you look at all of this together, those are only the 5 things we need to worry about. So once somebody makes a change with their organization, it's going to bounce around this structure, these 5 elements, kind of like a pinball machine. So if you're as old as I am, you've probably seen the pinball machine where you pull back this little lever and a little metal ball bounces around in this game, this pinball machine. And that's kind of how change happens in your organization. So I like to use ISO 9000. When it first came around, it was created in the European Common Market. And in the US, it was an input. So something happened externally. It was ISO 9000 standards. And we all decided, it turned out that this was such an impact internationally that it affected the US market. So now you couldn't even buy and sell materials for making your products without being ISO certified, because we wanted to sell to the European Common Market. So internally in the US, it started affecting all our customers. So once we decided that we couldn't sell to our customer with our own little small organization, we had to develop a system that would allow us to be ISO certified so we could sell to the external market. So now when we do that, it affected our whole culture. It affected our internal environment. We had to get people on board. We had to make this change happen. And so we found out we might have had to hire additional people who understood what ISO 9000 was. And so we created a place for people. And at that point, we had to change our whole quality department to an ISO quality department. That changed our organizational structure. And by doing that, we had to add people again. So it bounced, this little metal ball bounced, this little change ball bounced around our organization. And then we became ISO certified. Now we can sell to our customers in the US. And at that point, you know, we created excellence. This whole change created more excellence within our whole organization. Now, every time a change happens, it happens similar to this. You know, there's this thing happening. It's going to affect people. It's going to affect organizational structure, possibly. May not affect all of them, but it's going to affect some of them. So if we look deeper into change, we can think of change on different levels. So just from inside the company, then we can think of levels being, well, this is a change at the employee level. This is the change at the organizational division level, and this is a change at the firm level. There's whenever a change happens, it happens either in a first order change or a second order change. And a first order change is this another word for continuous improvement, looks the same as a second order change as far as, you know, the way the curve works and everything. And then on the major change is more of a step change. That is a second order change. So here I like to describe this as if I had an old clunker of a car and I bought a brand new car, maybe a top of the line Mercedes, you know, really beautiful car, and I had a old Ford Pinto, you know, 77 Ford Pinto. Well, that's a big major change to me, but it's only a incremental change because the rules of the road didn't change. The rules I didn't have to get a different type of driver's license. I didn't have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. So this was just kind of incrementally. I went from a really clunker of a car, a really bad car, what we'd call a clunker, to a really nice car, which was a big change to me, but still an incremental positive change. Now, the difference between that and a second order change, if I traded that brand new, beautiful car in for a helicopter, now I made a major step change because I have to learn how to fly a helicopter. Whole different type of, I had to get a pilot's license instead of a driver's license. I have to get a whole different mechanic. I can't park it in my garage anymore. So that would be an example of a second order change. On the very lowest level, we can see first order changes, adaptations, or if it turns out to be a negative, then it's a deterioration, a slow deterioration. So that works in all these cases inside the company. It's either adaptation or it's a deterioration if we do it something that's not good, a negative results. Now, on the positive side, this major step change is like a metamorphosis. And then if it was the negative side of that would be the exact opposite of a metamorphosis, where you'd be dissolving, a dissolution of what we're trying to do. So those are just inside the company. So if we think externally, let's look externally now. So externally, there's a bunch of changes, and I call this the 4th level, 5th level, and 6th level. So on the industry level, let's pretend like we're in the oil and gas industry. If we're in the oil and gas industry, then that industry can make changes that forces us to make changes. It's coming from outside of our organization, it's coming from the external market, and then we are being pulled in that direction. The other changes we're pushing out, this one we're being pulled into the change. And then on the national level, that would be whatever nationality you are, they may make rules and regulation changes that affect the industry, and we have to relate to that. So again, we're being pulled to this change. Our organization's being pulled. And then on the global level, like the ISO 9000 was a global change. Well, there are other global changes going on too, where a whole bunch of companies and the whole world has changed in a way. So that pulls our nation. It also pulls the industry, and it'll make us go through a different change. So on the positive side, if it's incrementally, then we're kind of evolving. You think of evolution as a species. Well, it's evolution as an industry, evolution as a nation, evolution in the global. Those are small changes. Well, there's also negative things that are maybe affecting us. So that might be a degeneration, where we're actually devolving into something that's worse off. And then on the, if it's a major change, that's a revolution. You can think of revolution the way it sounds. It's just a revolutionary change. It's by a group of people that we're just forced into. And then the disintegration from that would be the opposite of that, a negative change. I always put the negative side in there because not every change turns out good, right? Some changes hurt us. And so we have to think in terms of those. So I did a little bit of research, did basically an AI brainstorming. And I said, well, what are some 6 global international trends? So here's some of the trends. Digital transformation. We're increasing the amount of digital technology that's involved. And even though we may not decide to do that, the whole world's doing that, right? So we're going to be forced into competing with people who are digitally transformed, going through this transformation. And the first thing that pops out is the one at the bottom, artificial intelligence. So remote work. So after COVID-19, the world has changed, right? So internationally, domestically, we're going through this point where people expect to work from home more often. And not only that, but there's some positive parts of that. There's we have fewer expenses maybe for the corporation. And if we do this right, and most everybody I work with, and when I do a project, they're international, right? So there might be Croatia, there might be India, there might be other places around the world that the people are from. And so we're able to find the best people in the world to do some of this work. And then the sustainability, whole concept of climate change, environmental concerns, and those things, whether you agree with climate change, you think it's man-made, you think it's the just normal polar pole shifts and the cycles of the sun and everything else, but no matter what, you're forced into that environment where people are talking about climate change. And then there's diversity, equity, inclusion. That's another big thing. There's actually in the US, we're running into all kinds of issues related to this. And whether you agree with it or not, it's affecting us, right? And then there's cybersecurity. More we depend on the digital transformation, the more cybersecurity becomes the issue. And then there's personalization of customers. And this has been around forever, but the trend is that customers expect that with all this digital transformation and all our capability, they're wanting more of a personal, I guess, more things adapted to them personally. And so I went through, and then artificial intelligence, it's here. In 3 years, if you don't know how to use artificial intelligence, you may not have a job, because all the white collar work will start with artificial intelligence and will be fine tuned from that first brainstorming effort. And that's just here. All right, so I went through and I looked up some other things. So here's a Harvard Business Review, 11 trends that shape the environment. So I kind of grayed out the things we've already talked about a little bit, and then I added a different color for things that kind of expand on that a little bit. So we're having more debates on fairness at the core of, and this is all the things, whether it's around race, whether it's around climate change, or whatever else, we're talking words like fairness, gender wage gap. So that's one of the trends that we see, volatility. In some places, there is no wage gap. In other places, there may be more of a wage gap. And sometimes in sports, that might be directly related to the financial, what the customers are willing to pay for. Then there's a skills gap. It's starting to widen and become, on the positive side, this is we have international skills, and there's a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of skills all over the world. So it gives you more of an opportunity to find the best people. The importance of employee well-being. This is will continue to grow, it says, and it's all kind of related to fairness and all these other things. The role of the manager is evolving too, because as you have more of a remote or hybrid workforce, the roles of the manager, and you see a lot of these things like employee well-being and fairness and gender and work, remote, hybrid, and skills gap. So that's changing the role of managers somewhat. And then the use of data and analytics will become more widespread as we have more AI, words, data science, business intelligence, those kind of things become more important. Companies will need to be more agile and adaptable. All these things are leading to change. So we think of the rise of enterprise adaptability, enterprise change, and we're looking at agile and other things that are becoming more and more important. Companies will need more transparent, be more transparent than ever before. And this is directly related to maybe corruption. So we'll have to see more of what we're talking about. So then I also found this article from the Gardner Group, and I, again, darkened out those things we already talked about and added a little bit more where it looks like it expanded on what we talked about. So quiet hiring, or finding ways to bring people in that are a little bit different. Hybrid flexible reaches the front lines. So now we're even in the past, if you're the person that's interacting with the customer, you're on the front lines or you're doing the work front lines, then that has made it a little harder to be flexible because you're there at a certain time and everything else. So we're going to find ways where this is going to happen more. Squeeze by competing leaders, employee expectations, managers need and support. So the managers and people and the leaders are being squeezed from all ends. How about this? Organizations must prepare for a new era of hyper automation. Because workforce is in the US, workforce doesn't want to work all the time. So we're looking at more automation. We're basically getting rid of a lot of jobs, even in fast food. So these things we talked about a little bit. Rise of this of the citizen developers changing the way we work in technology. So now there's more freelancers and there's more people. I know my daughter's in Denver. She's a full stack developer. So she can work anywhere, any place, anytime from any location. And it's changing the way we do things, making more of a free agents. And then we're also, we're trying to prepare for digital ethics. So the whole concept of AI can be very helpful, but also you can make it very specific. It can be manipulated. So if you do AI searches and you're trying to search something in a way that others don't want you to know, the people who put it together, they can skew what you learn in ways that can be manipulated. So if you ask it political questions, it can be manipulated. If you ask it religious questions, it can be manipulated. If you ask it related to climate change, it can be manipulated. So AI can be manipulated in ways to make you think that what you're learning is the best information when it may not be. And so that's one of the ethical issues that we have to face. And emerging trends shaping our new future. And this is from another source. This also, I grayed out those things we already talked about, but globalization will be redefined with a stronger emergence of social capitalism. Then over here it says use of on-demand workforce will increase. We talked about that a lot, that it will keep increasing. A new burning platform for healthcare reform. So they're really looking at how to get deeper into the healthcare reform. A lot of this is political in nature. Some of it is financial in nature. But as finance and politics play a big role, then we get things skewed in different ways. Supply chains will fragment and reconfigure themselves. We're seeing that right now. The definition of workplace will change, and we talked about that a little bit. And industries reinvent, upskilling and reskilling becomes a major priority, because as these changes happen, then accounting will change, engineering will change because of AI. And so now we're going to have to change the way we approach engineering, change the way we approach other things. And these other things we talked about a little bit. So this is where I like to just kind of rediscover this engine of change, what I call it. So with all of these aspects, every time we make a change, we got to think about how we're going to react to this change and what we're going to do about it. So these are the 7 things, the 7 attributes of excellent management, I call it, and what we'll have to look at whenever we go through one of these new changes. So first is leadership. Leadership is not only top down, but it's also bottom up. We have to learn how to empower people to go through these changes so that we can be more agile, make those decisions on the lowest level. The leadership drives culture, and culture is this cable on this mobile. I like to use this mobile because everything's in balance. If you remove any of these 7 attributes, then the whole thing falls apart. So if this leadership ever opens up and drops it, you just broke the whole thing. If you take a big pair of scissors, you cut the culture, you broke the whole thing again. That's how important that is. Leadership drives culture, And leadership and culture drives customer focus. I always say customers can never be number one unless they come third. So this is important when we look at a change. We got to say, is leadership on board? Do we have the right people empowered? Is the culture ready to go through this change? Do we have a lot of culture work we have to do? And are we focused on the right value added stuff related to the customer? Then do we have the right people? Are we building the right teams, getting rid of the conflict? Do they have the right core competencies or skills to make something happen? Do we have the right processes and systems in place? Do we have to improve those or change those? And are we measuring performance of all this stuff so that we know whether we're getting better or worse? I think last time we talked about how they all fit together, but if we remove any one of those things, we don't have a good change. So it takes vision as in leadership, resources as in people and the things we have to work with, capable workforce as in the core competencies and the skills, capable processes as systems and processes, capable culture or good culture, and the right people and the right problem solving and tools. So without the right vision, we have confusion. Without leadership, we have confusion. Without the resources, we have anxiety and frustration because there's so much to do and not enough people to do it. Without the capable workforce, then we have slower little progress because we're reinventing things and we're trying to learn as we go. Without the capable processes, then we're reinventing the wheel all the time. We're trying to do the same thing that has already been done. If we don't have the right culture, then we're putting up barriers so that we can't make changes. If we don't have the right people, incentives for the people, then we have sabotage and bad feelings because the people feel like they're being abused. If we don't have the right action plan, then we have false starts. So this is all around the tools and project management. So that's how all these things fit together. So now, if we were going to think about just those things we talked about, the external environment, we would go through and we'd say, okay, what are the external environment issues that are affecting us and what can we do about it? So we would think about, well, leadership, culture, customer focus is what we can do about it, how we're going to make that happen. So we would use these to brainstorm on how we make the change. So here's something also, if we look at how we're going to go through this change, you have to do things before the change, during the change, after the change. So as we see those ripple effects coming from outside of organization, then we're going to look at, well, forecasting and strategy. We're going to look at risk management. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a good risk or a bad risk? And we have to kind of think of that before we ever start that change. And here's something that most people don't think of, and that is our history of how we got here creates the momentum of how we can go through the future and into the next change. So our history of honesty and quality and how we treat people is important. This is important, grounded in truth. We're at a point where we don't even know what truth is half the time because we only get half the story and we get it slanted a lot of times. So grounded in truth is behind all of this, good relations, communication systems. And then as we go through the change, we're thinking about make sure the systems work, make sure that we have the environment and culture ready, communication, we have the tactical planning, the project management is all part of this. And then at the end, we're preparing for the next change. So think of the history of commitment. Well, now we're getting ready for the next change. Lessons learned becomes important there. Communication, damage control, exploitation, and public relations, that becomes good. So exploiting is a good thing if it's a good change, right? We're going to exploit that to make positive things happen. And it's also a bad thing if it's politically motivated. So now this is another group of things I saw. So remember the words grounded in truth. So we're manage their political risks. And so this is what a lot of companies are starting to do. They're managing based on political risk. They're being proactive and strategically, what can we get out of this? And it may not always be grounded in truth. It may be what they need to do to market. Sometimes it's marketing. Influence tactics to improve personal organizational interests, and then public will. All these things work against truth sometimes, because sometimes the public will is not there. It's the right thing to do. It's what you want to do. It's what you need to do, but there's no public will, maybe because of not knowing all the things that happen. But grounded in truth is how you overcome these things. If you have a reputation of being truthful, then you have a reputation that helps you build momentum through that change. And so here's other studies that say uh, the political fractions inside and among regions heat up. So we hear wars and rumors of wars and all kinds of stuff going on. We talked about climate change. That's another part of the international trend. And then we have what's called political spending. We only have a certain amount of goodwill that we can win. And so it's a lot of that's related to lobbying efforts. So that's kind of the pros and cons of looking externally, because some of it it should be grounded in truth and it should be important, but sometimes we don't always have that opportunity because there's so much pressure to do things in certain ways, whether it's true or not. And so, but the next thing, so that let's think of the people issues. So people issues, this was a study back in 91 that showed a change in a project cancellation. So it says we are at 100% of work output. We made this change, so it dropped down to 50% productivity, work output. So by the change happened, the people were already, this is where the change is just happening. This is when they first heard about it, right? And it took them a year to get back up to 80% of where they were because they went through this negative change, right? And so the best you can do is minimize that dip. And there are certain things you can do for that. But as an example, let's say this is a normal curve compared to the most common mistakes in downsizing the workforce. So if we think of a bell-shaped curve, statistical average here, then we have certain people who are superstars. They're just the cream of the crop. Some people are above average, and some people are below average, and some people you just have to help them tie their shoelaces. It's just, they're just at the bottom. They're just learning. We're trying to get them to where we want them to be. But if you mistreat these people because of changes that are happening, then here's the reflect you have on it. These are the first people to leave if they're not treated right, right? Because these superstars can find other jobs. They're just, you're going to have to really try hard. But if you're not thinking about how to treat these people and you're maybe downsizing the workforce, then you're left with more of your workforce looks like this, because it's going to be hard for these people to find jobs. Now, on the short term, cost goes way down, profits go up, people work harder, and fear is high because all these people see that we got rid of the most expensive people, right? So the cost goes down. Profits go up because costs went down. People work harder because they got more to do. So these people, their productivity went up. And fear is high because they think they might be next, or they don't know what's going to happen. And people are scared of this, right? And so this is on the short term, this is what it looks like. On the long term, the next person, this person who made this happen might get a promotion because it looks good on paper. But on the long term, costs are going to be higher before because you got to replace these people, and they're not going to come in at the same cost that you have, and not to mention the whole trying to get them up to speed and everything is expensive too. Profits fall because cost is higher than before. People get burned out because they've been working long, hard hours to just keep up. And now hate follows fear. If you make people fear you, you make them hate you. And if you make them hate you, they'll sabotage what you're doing. So it's important to put people at the center. And that's the whole point of this change as it affects the change. Now, it doesn't work this way everywhere all at the same time. I brainstormed with people at NASA a few years ago. Here's what we found. These were the people who left because these people were political reason they couldn't get rid of them because it's what they do. They help underprivileged or people who may have harder time finding work to help them find work someplace sometimes. And these people are entrenched and they're doing fun work. If you stop paying them, it'll be a couple of weeks before a couple of months before they stop, right? They're driving the rover on the moon and things like that. And these people do most of the work. So that's what their rifts look like. But this is the workforce they have left after a rift, after something. And so that's kind of way change happens. Now, the way you would use this, you would brainstorm on all those things that are related to people. As you make a change or as your organization's affected by change, you'd go in and brainstorm. And then you'd say, what can we do from a leadership perspective to make this better? What about culture? How would we rebuild this culture? How can we focus on what the customer needs in order to make this better? How can we look at people and team building, motivational theories, conflict resolution, those kind of things? And then we'd think about what are the core competencies and skills we need to manage this change, and what are the changes in the processes and systems we need to make, and then what are the performance measures? How do we know whether we're getting better or worse? So that's how you would use this. You'd go in and think about this change is going to happen. This change has happened. How is it going to affect our people? So related to the people side, we're trying to make changes happen, and we're trying to make it to minimize those dips in the productivity, morale, and quality of the things we do. So again, history of commitment, that builds momentum. If we treat people well for a long time, then they're going to be more likely to work with us. If we treat people poorly for a long time, they're going to more likely to work against us. So relationship building, planning, leadership, history of commitment. Again, I think I put in there twice, accident, but it's that important. And then rational reason. So if the people know there's a reason why we're going through this change, they're more likely to work with us. Team acknowledgement. It's not your fault. You did a great job. We have to make this change because the whole world's changing. If we don't change, we're going to lose, and we're all going to lose our job. Time frame. Can you hold with me for 6 months? This change will take about 6 months to go through. If you let me know that, I'm more likely to be on your side. Communication all along the way, right? And then at the end, you got to understand this is just one of many changes that come. So you got to update your vision, your planning, your relationship building, the leadership, and all that kind of stuff. So the next part is organizational structure. And there's just several different types of organizational structure, and we could talk about that, but we'll skip over this a little bit. And then also what's happening in a very agile world and a very dynamically changing world, we're talking project management, because that's how you make change happen. So just functionally, the further we come over here, the more agile we are. And the further we are over here, the more not agile we are. So this is very authoritative with the functional levels, and this is more authoritative with the project management level. So world's going more faster toward project management and agile. So each department requires an organizational structure that's designed for that department. So agility means you got to have quicker change, and that's the primary tool that we're using. And so that's why the world's becoming closer. I just drew up a little picture that kind of describes what an organization in the middle of a dynamic change might look like. So you may have internal policies and procedures. Then you may have a ring of what I call the ring of overhead functions. So these people are charging to this, but you also have projects. There's project A, there's project B, there's project C, there's project, all these internal ring of overhead, they're charging directly to the project. So you have activity-based costing type thing. Notice that this project's very hierarchical. This project's flatter, and this one's square. So this one would fit more of a legal department where everybody's kind of on the same level. And this might fit more of a knowledge workers, and this may fit more of a construction site, just to give you an idea. You got to design it for the purpose of and so now you're going to have a virtual workforce. They're kind of like a little cluster of balloons, right? So these balloons get smaller and bigger, and they go through this. And then you also have an employee pool that could work in any one of these projects at any time. And then you may decide that, well, there's all kinds of things we can do. This is a major business market. So let's create our own little kind of unit of looks like this around this. And they're dealing with the same internal environment policies. And we may have another one over here, and we may have another one over here. So these are all, that's an organization that might look like, and when the world's just changing so fast, you don't know what to do. So if this business unit is working on stuff that goes away, you cut them loose, you sell it off, you absorb it into the rest of the company. The same employee pool would work in all of these areas. And if this one's going so strong that your company's dragging it down, you may create a sister company, a company that works on its own, but you own part of it. And if this company is doing something else, and you may expand it in a different way. So this mother organization is creating daughter organizations. Some of those you'll cut off and let die. Some of those you'll expand and cut off and let them grow faster than you are, and you'll spin it off and have something else. And you're going to have an organization. I mean, that's an organization designed around change. Someone says it'll never happen. SAIC was designed that way. It's a company I used to work for. I showed them this model. We talked about it in the 90s. And this is their picture from 2000, their 2002. That's their picture of what their company looked like, 2002. So anyway, so in that organizational structure, you're going to say this change is coming. We're going to have to change our structure. So you had to brainstorm. What are the leadership, culture, customer focus, people, core competencies, processes, systems, and performance measure issues that we'll have to work on in order to make all those changes we brainstorm on happen. So in order to make that change happen, we have to design it around the change and competitive issues. Before we even make the change. Master leadership and empowerment. We'll have to master core competencies and staffing. Communication all along the way. We'll have to have leadership involved. We'll have to control our egos, control our fear. We'll have to do team building. We'll have to do those kind of things in order to minimize this dip. And over here, we have to plan for the future because the next change is going to happen. Now, internal environment, remember the internal things are like the cultural things. And so if we think about what poor producing organizations look like, motivation is achieved through exercise of control and authority. The more authority you force on people, the lower productivity you have in the company. Jobs are organized, methods prescribed, standards are set, goals and budgets are set by management. And the key here is by management without the input of the people doing the work. That's not agile. That's not a fast moving company. That's a bureaucratic company. Compliance by hierarchy and economic pressures. If you don't do what I say, I want to take money away from you. I'm going to force negative things upon you. That's a way to produce low producing companies. Trains, plans, supplies, and tells everybody what to do. Get the people who are doing the work to help in that process and decide what the training looks like. So this is only from the top down, oversees the work instead of having employees as part of the work. This is Likert back in 1987 came up with this list. Also came up with a list of high producing organizations. So in high producing organizations, there are favorable attitudes toward the organization work. There's a mutual confidence and trust through the organization. There's high sense of involvement, achievement, goals, sense of dissatisfaction if we're not meeting the goals. And then we're harnessing the motivational theories, ego, security, all these things, Maslow, all the motivational theories, tightly knit, functioning social system. People like each other, want to be around each other. That's a high producing organization. Measures for self-guidance. Instead of you measuring me so you can force things on me, I'm measuring me. I'm measuring myself, and I'm also trying to improve myself. And so now a change is coming in our organization. So now we got to think of those internal environmental issues. and those cultural issues. How's this going to change us internally? What are we going to think about it? How do we have leadership that's ready to tackle that? What are the cultural issues? Are we focused on the right things with the customer? Do we have the right people involved with the right team building? And do we have the right core competencies? Are we looking at the right systems and processes? And do we have the right performance measures? In each case, we look at that as we look at each of the other things. If we look at, well, how can we minimize this dip, empower people to help solve the problems, get them involved, they know what they're doing, get them to help, allow people to control more of their circumstances, build trust, and then communicate early, and then reassign people as early as possible. So if they're going to lose something, put them back in place, because you're working on the chemistry of the culture. And so if people see other people treated well, even if they have to leave, if you treat them well and you help them find their next job and open doors for them in other places, then it goes around the whole organization. They feel like they trust you more because they feel like they'll be treated more. And so those are the kind of things. Next is systems. So when I think of systems, I'm thinking of things like professional project managers are involved. Established systems, we're improving the system so we know what's going to go on. Maybe we're getting a project management organization or Lean Six Sigma looking at what we need to do next. Those are all part of systems issues. Value engineering, all those traditional Lean Six Sigma continuous improvements done up front. And we're following the rules of those systems in order to make it place. Someone once told me, I was driving down the road and I accidentally went in the wrong entrance, right? And the person next to me was an industrial engineer like me and looked over at me, says, Craig, you know, the system works when you follow the rules. And so if you have a system in place, it only works if you follow the rules. So communication, leadership support, culture support, and then preparing for the next change. So what you do is you think about those systems, you'd go in and you'd think about, well, how are we going to create all of the, how are we going to react to all these system changes? And then there's more we can think about. So we could also think about professional project managers. Again, I think I already did all this, so I'm not going to go through this one again, but it's basically the same. One was related to systems and one was related to, but I think the mistake I made is I had one related to processes and I left it out of the slide deck. So anyway, that's an overview. I went through it very quickly. The whole point is that every change that happens to you or with you or within your organization is going to drive changes throughout those other 7 or those other 5 attributes, right? So we're going to look at any change that happens going to affect one of these other things. And so that's how you plan for that. And whenever you go through a strategic change and those kind of things. So I went through it real quick. Hopefully I didn't go through it too quick. That work for you?
Thank you very much, Craig. Very informative and also helps us to understand how changes impact different parts of the organization and how once one piece of the puzzle changes, it's like a domino effect. It'll impact everything else. It doesn't make any difference where you start, but you need to keep an eye, where is it going to go next, and try to be in control. So I appreciate your time and points that you've explained. So the platform is open. If anyone has any questions, please put them and we will take the questions right now. I have a few questions for you. The first question is, you've mentioned a lot in the beginning about basically how the external environment, especially when it's national, regional, or basically global, can impact us from outside the organization. Is there, this might sound silly, but is there a way that we can resist the global change? Say, no, we're not going to do it. Because a lot of basically what I'm here trying to ask, as what you said, not all change is good. Definitely not for everyone. Right. And the first thing that comes to mind and always has been mentioned is, if you don't change, you'll die. And there's a lot of examples out there, Kodak, Nokia, and you name it, how companies who resisted change that basically went out. But is there a way to resist the global change immediately? And also, how can we manage it? If not basically resist it, how can we manage it?
Yeah. So it becomes the world is changing at a point where there's so many political things going on, right? And so a lot of times those political things are geared around people who have something to gain, and and countries and people are not always morally, ethically right. Sometimes it's personal gain, sometimes it's financial gain, sometimes it's power for other sources. So that's what we're fighting, right? And I'll give you an example. United States, the way the states are set up originally was every state was to have its own personality. And so if you really like that personality, you move to that state. And then if the people in that state want to change it, they change it. And it was more related to, it was kind of a great experiment, right? So all these different, and if something worked really well, then the other states would say, oh, that works really well, then let's try it here. And that's kind of the original concept of the United States. Had one together that would hopefully interact together, but the world we live in becomes so polarized, right? So this cannot happen at the same time this happens. This is not right, and this is right at the same time. So there's all these clashes going on. It becomes personality based and power based, who, if you have the most power. So on the commercial side, the best thing to do is to find out what works and do that. On the emotional and the economic and the moral side, you got to do what's right regardless of the cost. I mean, because I believe in a higher power, and I believe that everything I do that hurts someone else hurts me. And so you have to do what's right regardless of the cost. On the commercial side, it's harder said than done, right? Because you're competing with people who play by different rules. And so that's one of those things that if I wish I could just come around and talk to everybody and say, hey, we're all one people. We're all alike. We all flesh and bone. We all have desires. We all have families. We all have people we love and everything else. And let's just act that way. Let's have the golden rule. Whatever's, do unto you as you do unto me. And that's what we're fighting. People don't live like that all the time. And you have experiences where there's people you love to work with, and they're just bend over backwards to do the right thing. And then there's people who you can't trust for a moment. And then there's people who motivate those people to do bad things. And it's just the world we live in. It's crazy. Because we know sometimes we'll see it right in front of us, but we'll not be able to make that difference because there's too many political factors going on. So I wish I had the answer to that question. That would be great. Maybe we ought to. Yeah, I think you got to do what's right. Way I live, I do what's right regardless of the cost. And if it hurts me, it hurts me. If it helps me, it helps me. Yeah, but it's always going to be right, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Another question is basically in all 7 parts of the model that you spoke, leadership, culture, and the customer comes first. You had it split before the change, and then after the change. Okay, you had it like 3 phases that we need to consider. So when you talk about before the change, the question is, well, during the change, finish. We're already in the change. It's happening. We have to carry it out. After the change, once we're done. When does before the change start? Okay, how early before? Because again, going too early, people might panic. Going too late before the change, it might be too late to do it. So the phase of when you say before the change, I know that there might not be a single answer saying it's this, and the answer would be depends. But how do we assess the depends part of when do I start working on the before the change part?
Yep. So if you think about before the change, this is all happening before the change, right? And so before the change, the answer to that question is today, yesterday, the day before, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And so if you and I work together and that I've always been honest to you, we know whether we agree or not, I'm always telling you exactly what I feel, why I think that way. I'm not lying to you. I don't have hidden agendas. So if we did that 5 years ago, today we'd be better friends, right? If we did that 2 days ago, then we'd still be friends, but we don't have that 5 years of experience of just treating each other well. And you have something and going on in your life, and I'm there for you. I come over and I help you. I try to help you go through those 4 things. Well, inside organizations, that same type of thing's happening. So happens, that part of it happens related to people and the culture side of things. So we're to love each other, right? And act like we love each other. So if you love me and I love you, and we take care of each other as far as I watch your back, you watch my back, then I built motivation. Anything that you're going through, I'm going to try to be there for you, right? And so that's kind of how that works. But if we look at before the change, if this is a physical change, like that means a project takes place to make that happen, that's one thing. But the people side of that happens before we ever start that project. It goes deeper than that project, and it comes out after that project's or is over. So we just talked about part of that people issue, right? But on the physical side of it, that physical change, we're going to have to go through some kind of portfolio and configuration management. They're different. Portfolio is kind of, what changes can we afford to make and those kind of things. Configuration management is, do we know it's going to not blow something else up? So those two are important. And then, so it may have been because of a continuous improvement effort. It may have been because we designed something new, like a process, a project, a product or service, or it may because of strategy. We should also think about systems, how it's going to relate to all these systems before so if we're going to design something, if we have a strategy, we got to make sure, how it's going to affect once we implement that strategy, how it's going to affect all the other things. And so all these things are going on before the change, right? And then, but on the personal side, the people side, it's how we treat each other, and we do that today. If we're trying to decide what kind of change to make, we may be over here in strategy, we may be over here in designing something new, we may be over here improving something we're already doing. And then each case, we're going to use all those 7 attributes to make sure that we thought about leadership, culture, customer focus, people, all those things. So the sooner you can start it, the better. Once you start it, once you decide on it, then people are going to start changing, so that curve's going to be quicker, deeper, and last longer on the transitional people side. This would be what the project's going through. So we got to make sure we understand what good looks like. We plan for what's good. We actually implement what our plan is, and then we close it out at the end. So I answered a whole bunch of questions there. I'm not sure I answered the one you asked.
It's as early as possible and be prepared. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other question, you've mentioned also related to people, we need to control egos. Okay. And
Ego. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that I see today in the world, as what you've also answered partially in the first question, unfortunately, it's going the opposite way around with technology competition and how the world is. I feel that, yes, there is a lot of talk about reducing egos and some people are responding, but contrary to to the world that we live, I can see a lot of egos trying to be the first, trying to be the biggest, trying to be the best, all that, and ego is splattering all over the place. So within our organization, how could you, if you have some advice on how can we manage and control that?
Yeah. So under the leadership aspect and the culture aspect, that's kind of where I see that a lot. So when I say leadership, I mean empowerment, make decisions on the lowest level. John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership said that the leader, if a poor leader becomes the lid, right? So the people will never get above that poor leader. It'd be like you've heard of people putting bunch of fleas in a cup, right? And they put a top on the cup, and the fleas will bounce up and hit their heads against the top. And pretty soon they only bounce so high because it hurts to hit your head against the top. So in our organization, a lot of leaders become the lid. Will never be any better than that leader. And that leader doesn't know everything. The people that are working on in that company know more than the leader on how to do that company. So the opposite side of that is the leader lifting those people up as high as they can be, right? So that's more of a servant type leadership. In places where it works really well, you know, where people, you feel like what you know, and it's even more important when you get knowledge workers. Like every time I teach a lot of classes, and when I go in a place, I'll consider those people in that class have more experience than I'll ever have in what they do. And therefore, my role is to facilitate, get their ideas out, not just to show them my ideas, right? Because my ideas are just from me. I'm only a person and I can only do so much. But what you've experienced, things in ways I've never experienced, I've never even thought of. That's important. One of my mentors, who was one of my professors when I was working on a PhD, told his PhD class, he says, wherever you go, you're not the smartest person there. So just remember, you're not going to be this. If you go on the plant floor, you're not going to be the smartest person on that plant floor, because there's people who are in that position, maybe working inside that manufacturing facility. And if they had the same opportunities you had, they may be doing better in this class than you are. And he says, so, you know, you go in and you look for those people who have such wisdom and control your ego, because that's how you're going to make improvements to things. And you're going to have to help maybe bring some of them out of their shells because they've been beaten down so much, right? And so they're not sharing any ideas anymore, because every time they share the idea, they get beaten for it. And so your goal is, if you go any place to make an improvement, listen to those people who have all the experience, because they've been thinking about these things for years and you're just getting there. And so I think the servant leadership mindset is the difference from an ego-centered mindset, right? So just seeing the value in other people and how their experiences, if they had your opportunities, they may be doing things that you can't even imagine.
Perfect.
But yeah, that is a big issue, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's getting worse with the social media, because now, you know, everything's on the camera. I want to show pictures of me doing great things. It's me. And, you know, it's sign of the times too, I guess.
Do agree with you a lot on what you just said. So I think with this, I have all the questions answered. I would like to thank all the participants who have been with us today. And also I would like to thank you, Craig, for your time and sharing the knowledge and experience that you have with us today in the hour that we've been together.
Yeah.
With this, go ahead.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
With this, we've reached the end of our webinar. So thank you very much, everyone, and bye-bye.